Hello, everybody. It looks like we are kicking off with our current edition of the D3L2 webcast series, podcast series, excuse me. Today's session is D3L2. Let's connect Power BI to Delta Lake and VSCode Databricks Power Tools. Just give us a couple minutes so we can go ahead and get YouTube set up and as well LinkedIn set up because we live stream to both locations. Meanwhile, as we're waiting, why don't you, as attendees, go ahead and chime in the Q&A or into the chat on where you're based out of. For example, my name is Denny, and I'm currently based out of Seattle, Washington. Well, specifically Redmond, Washington, but close enough, I guess. And how about yourself, Gerard? Why don't you go ahead and let the folks here, good folks here, know what where you're based out of?
Yeah, well, I'm from Austria, next to Vienna, actually, and yeah, really looking forward to the next hour, let's say. And yeah, I'm already almost in my day's end, so it's the last call for me. And then afterwards, I'm happy to get home and to my kids. So
excellent. So I think what Gerard is trying to claim here is that we need to make sure you all ask questions really fast, and so that way we can end the session earlier. Is that what you're trying to say, Gerard? No, I'm joking. Okay. All right, we are live on all three platforms. So we're live on LinkedIn, we're live on YouTube, and we're live on here using our Linux Foundation-based Zoom webinar. So if you do have questions, that's great. But I really want to go ahead and start with having this awesome conversation, Gerard. Now, like we said, the session's event name basically is Let's Connect Power BI to Delta Lake VSCode Databricks Power Tools. So we obviously will be discussing those aspects. But what a lot of you may or not know is that Gerard and I have actually known each other for quite some time because of our association. I guess that's a nice way of phrasing it. Yes, where we were from our days back when I was part of Microsoft. Now, in order for us to provide that a little historical context, I'd love to actually have Gerard explain, number one, a little bit about yourself. Like, who are you, and like, how did you even get into it? Like, what'd you do for college, for starters? Like, let's just even start with that. Actually, wait, no. Before we do that, why don't you explain who you are? Let's start. Let's start current. Who you are and what do you currently do? Let's start with that statement.
Yeah. Hey. So hey everyone. Yeah, my name is Gerhard Brückler. As I said, I'm from Austria, living next to Vienna in a small town called Woltersdorf. This is my family. I have two kids, pretty young. One is 3-year-olds, and the other one is just 6 months. And yeah, I'm working at a company called Pico, where we focus on building data and AI solutions for our customers in the mainly German-speaking area, but well, we're open for new business, obviously. Yeah, came into the whole data and analytics area actually by accident, because like my first job happened to be about reporting and data warehousing, and well, since then I pretty much liked it and I stayed in there, and well, that's how I evolved, and now in the end I ended up here doing Microsoft Azure, Databricks, Delta Lake, and well, everything that's somehow connected to it.
Okay, all right, perfect. So let's go. But before we talk provide some little bit of historical context. See, eventually I'll be able to speak. I just want to call both Severino and Greg Kramer both say hi to us on the YouTube channel. So I just want to call that out. Okay, so let's start. Look, did you go to computer science in college? Or was like how you started, or like were you studying something else altogether? I'm just curious.
So it's actually an interesting question, because like I actually never went to university or college. So in Austria we do have a different kind of school system where like after high school. So we have like kind of a mixed high school where you also get some technical education.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Technically, you're well able to start directly afterwards.
Oh,
so
okay.
I basically started working with the age of 20. Yeah, 2006. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's very similar to like Quebec's CEGEP program, where basically it's or like a community college, like in between. Like basically it's right after high school, yeah. But that's an extended.
Probably
program.
I'm not too familiar with those concepts, but yeah. So
okay. Okay, cool. So then, okay, so when you finished that technical portion of the high schools slash the in between, right? Yeah. Like, what did you start off with? What were you like? Were you writing like VB? Like what were you working on?
So initially, like my education would have been about network technician.
Oh, like, cool. Okay.
Designing networks and stuff.
Okay. All right.
But as I said, like randomly through my first job, I actually got into a a company that was working with Microsoft SQL Server back then and all its tools and doing like data warehousing and reporting projects. And yeah, as I said, I just liked it and I think I did pretty well. And I just stayed in that field. So
gotcha. So when you were so for most folks, for most of the folks that knew you already, they probably don't know a little bit of this history, but then we've got a bunch of folks that probably don't know this stuff. So let's talk a little bit. So you started doing the SQL Server stuff, were you primarily, and data warehousing stuff, were you primarily building it on like SQL Server itself? Were you primarily building analysis services? Because obviously that led to Power BI at some point. So I'm just curious how,
sure.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah. So
no, actually all parts. But the first touch points I actually had with reporting services.
That's right. I forgot. Actually, yes, my bad.
Which was already so like we're building like a reporting solution with one of our customers. They had like a huge analysis services cube already built. Like a colleague of mine built it, and I was just like the reporting guy and building reports on top of it. But I already had to write some MDX back then to actually get the data out of the cube. So, and I think that's probably my starting career for analysis services, MDX, and well, what in the end led to Power BI and Tabular and yeah, what else is there?
Okay. So again, let's provide some historical context for folks. MDX is multi-dimensional expressions, okay? And that's pretty much how Gerard and I started chatting with each other because I was one of the schmucks working on the AS team or with the AS team or whatever I was doing at the time. So analysis service team, excuse me. And so, all right, so now you're well within the realm of the pain of dealing with BI. That's obvious. And so that makes sense. Okay, cool. And so then you went into Power BI, like Power Pivot and Power BI at the same time as that transition back in what, 2010 or whatever it was?
11 years ago, which I think was when Power BI was actually released. I mean, there was Power Pivot before.
Yeah.
Tabular, I think, was also even older, if I'm not mistaken.
Sorry, which one? Sorry?
Tabular.
Oh, yeah. Tabular models. Yeah. So yes, tabular models were the basis for Power Pivot. We then wrote books like, and I'm unfortunately one of them, who wrote books on Power Pivot for Excel and SharePoint. Yeah, you actually, I didn't know your network path because then I would have probably made you read the claims token networking infrastructure that was used in SharePoint just to drive you nuts.
It's actually quite fun because like the first public session that I did was actually Power BI in SharePoint back then, where I think Microsoft canceled that setup like, I don't know, like a month later, and then they decided to go like the different path, moving it out of SharePoint again. So it was quite funny.
Yeah, that was fun. So, okay, all right. So and then we have. Oh, by the way, I want to do a temporary pause. I want to just do a shout out. Okawa Shingo is actually joined us from YouTube, and the reason I want to do a shout out for him is because he actually is a primary developer for the cool Delta sharing project called Codicero, which is a minimalistic Rust implementation of the Delta sharing server. I just wanted to do a shout out to him. So anyways, all right, back to us now. So that way, at least everyone knows that, yes, in fact, we're live. Okay, so, all right. So, all right, now you're doing the Power BI stuff, which is great. And you're making great business, because there's a lot of people that really want to use Power BI. Like, it's a very popular tool. I'm not trying to debate Tableau versus Looker or whatever. That's all your thing. I'm just like, but it's a powerful tool. People are definitely using it. How did you get into data engineering then? Like, where did that shift happen?
Well, so it was not. So the main focus never was like, well, Power BI or reporting per se, but more like building data warehouse underneath. So did not just use reporting and analysis services, but also like SQL Server and integration services to build like a BI solution end to end. And well, like I'd say like about 7-8 years ago, there was like this starting movement when people started to move to the cloud, and where you build up data lakes. And well, naturally, as we always try to keep cutting edge with new technology, we also had a look at data lakes and those new technologies. And then at some point, I also had touch points with HD Insight. Fortunately, I never used it. Yeah, and when we actually wanted to start a project with HD Insight, we also realized that, well, Databricks just started on Azure, and then we were happy that we could just move to Databricks and do all the processing there, because, yeah.
So for all of you that may not grok, so Gerard knows that I actually was on the 9-person Project Isotope team, which was the precursor of said HD Insight. And so to all of y'all that are listening, the 5 of you are listening here right now, yeah, I do apologize for that one. Gerard was smart enough to sidestep that particular issue.
Yeah, but it's still there. You can still provision it.
Oh no, it's amazing. So which is great, but
well, I wouldn't go that far, but
yeah. Okay, no, it's amazing. It's still around. That's what I mean. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, we're in agreement. So okay, all right. Let's jump right to the point though. All right. So you got into the data engineering because naturally it's just more like you kept on going down the stack, right? Like you start with the Power BI, which is the analytics, but basically it sort of forced you to know more about the data sources and everything that's going in. I'm just curious, like when you started shifting over to working with Hadoop/Spark, yes, you're using Databricks, but this is not a Databricks pitch, even though I'm wearing a Databricks logo, the old one, by the way. I'm curious, like, was it just because you need to go full throttle Spark? You had to understand what was going on, or Power BI Spark, or was it just the data, like more like the data processing where you're modifying the larger data sets? Like what made you start doing that? Because I know plenty of people like our buddies like Marco and who like are able to stay just in the Power BI realm, and they're doing a great job there. So what sort of forced you to go deeper into the stack, right? Versus being
actually
like
it was more like the real data engineering and the pipeline stuff, like data integration. Because like back then we had a customer that was building like a tracking solution for automotives, where they got like a lot of sensor measurements from the devices, and in a format like in JSON format that was not really easy to process in, let's say, traditional tools like a SQL Server that we would usually have used. So we had a look on what else we could do. Back then we were also trying to use what was it called? Data Lake Analytics.
Oh, Azure Data ADLA. Azure Data Lake Analytics. Yeah. ADLA,
yeah, we did some POCs there, but it didn't really work out. And then, as I said, like we just gave Databricks a try and Spark basically, and it was like super easy to do it there. And also in terms of scalability, it just worked, even though we were dealing with billions of rows. Yeah, that's how I got into the data engineering part. So again, like, because, well, I needed to, or we needed to, and
no, that makes sense.
That's the interesting part, that you always like learn new stuff there when you're dealing with customers and trying to build state-of-the-art solutions. So
Sure. Okay, so then now you've started becoming more of the Spark guy. Oh, I'm just curious, like, are you still like writing most of your queries though in SQL? Like, or did you decide to go into Scala or Python land? I'm just curious.
No, mostly Python, but depends on, like, for let's say core pipelines, it's usually Python.
Okay.
Because of its flexibility. But when it's I don't know, like customer facing, let's say in the latest layer, potentially also becomes SQL, because it's usually more readable by more people. Let's put it like that.
Right. Yeah. So basically, I like that. Customer facing is SQL, but the core pipelines are okay. Gotcha. In Python. Cool. No, actually, that's really cool to know. All right. And then, what made you even check out or take a look at Delta Lake? Because I mean, this invariably leads me to be starting to talk about like Power BI to Delta Lake, but I'm just why you built that. But you obviously were interested in Delta Lake before that, so I'm just curious, what invariably led you to even care about Delta Lake in the first place?
Yeah, well, coming back to that project where we were processing this automotive data. Well, you probably know, like, the pain in the ass of dealing with partitions and updating data, etc. Yeah, that's what we were doing. It was super complex, and then suddenly Data Lake showed up and said, "Hey, well, we have this merge statement," which, well, obviously was pretty nice. And so we actually moved all of our tables to Delta Lake. were able to use merge and pretty much simplify most of our processing pipelines, because we didn't have to deal with all this partition switching, etc. Yeah, so that's that's the main thing I would say. And then as it also developed pretty fast and pretty good, there came new features. It was just naturally to keep using it.
Oh, so that's interesting. So in other words, you weren't, even though you come from a data warehousing background, you weren't really thinking so much about like the transactional protection or any of that stuff. It was really just like, you've got merge, this will make my life easier. So that's what that was the impetus to dive
That
into.
was actually the main reason, because the transactional stuff back then we were only loading, I think once an hour, and we were the only ones using that system. So there was no problem with conflicting transactions or anything. So yeah.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so yeah, basically to provide context, it's a batch processing system. You're going once an hour. Worst case scenario, you just blow it away and rebuild if it had to, or something like that. So you weren't terribly concerned about it. But then it was because of the awesomeness of the merge statement that was put in pretty early into Delta Lake that basically that made your, from a running features perspective, significantly easier, simplified your code.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm just curious, what did you do before you had that merge statement? Were you like running a bunch of deletes and updates on your own, or rewriting the entire table on your own? Like, I'm just curious, what did you have to do before these merge statements?
Yeah, so for the lower layers, let's say, we kept the partitioning the same. So when we knew we loaded that particular hour, we just could replace that hour in the target data set, to just remove it and just replace it with the new data that we loaded in. And for the kind of gold layer, I think we either deleted it manually, like loading the data, deleting it, writing it again, or combining it, reloading it, saving it. And as I said, like that was really a pain.
Yeah, because it required multiple steps too, right? I mean, so
just not just from a physical and storage point of view, but also from a complexity point of view, like code complexity, obviously.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the thing for folks to remember is that, especially during that time, right? Typically, these type of data lake solutions, that's not like, prior to Delta Lake, it was basically required you to run like the equivalent of like 7 or 8 like of your own statements that would do overwrites, moving tables over, renaming them, putting views or whatever else because it would require a full scale overwrite. So there was the infrastructure complexity in addition to the actual code complexity. Okay, so all right, so that's perfect. Well then, all right, now, so that explains why you got into Delta Lake, because it simplified your data processing, and you were already doing data engineering because you had to make sense of this automotive data, and then you've continued on. Well then, so far so good. I get like why then, but why Power BI to Delta Lake? Because this is a project that's dear to you, obviously, and you are the primary contributor, that you are the one who started the whole thing. It's sitting in Delta IO connectors right now for anybody that wants to use it. So it's you're a star Delta Lake contributor. Why go through the headache of building this thing? I'm just curious. Like, why did you do this?
Yeah, I think it's actually a couple of reasons. One of them being that I just want to understand the depths of Delta Lake and how the transaction log is working, etc. That's one thing. Fair. But I think back then the main reason was that when you want to get data out of Databricks into Power BI, we actually had to have a server run or a cluster running. Right. Even if you just load like, I don't know, 5 megabytes of data for whatever reason, you had to spin up the cluster, takes like 10 minutes. Then you load the data, etc. Cluster keeps running for, I don't know, another 30 minutes, costs money, etc. Yeah. And especially for the reporting part, you usually don't do reporting on billions of rows. I mean, that's happens sometimes, but that's not the common case, I would say. At least not for when you try to load it into Power BI. So I was basically looking for a way. What else could we do? I mean, we do have like this processing engine of Power Query within Power BI. That back then was not yet able to read Parquet files, so that was a reason why it had to be delayed a bit. And then I guess like 3 years ago, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Power BI finally supported Parquet files. And if you know how Delta Lake works, it's basically just a bunch of JSON files and a bunch of Parquet files. And so basically we had all the tools available to actually read and parse the Delta log, get the files out there that you need to load, get the metadata, get the structure, etc., and actually present the final results in Power Query and finally load it into Power BI. So, and now with the connector, you can just go to your data lake, wherever it is hosted, basically, take the data, load it into Power BI without having a Databricks or Spark cluster or any, I don't know, like Synapse serverless, whatever, up and running. You can just use Power Query to do the processing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, especially when you're not talking about excessively large amounts of data. Power Query, your single machine these days can process a heck of a lot of data on its own. Yeah. So just provided you're not going full throttle on health.
It's obviously not a solution, as I said, like for a billion row reporting.
Yes.
That's not what it's built for. But as I said, like considering the, let's say 90% of the reporting projects that you do on top of Delta Lake or a data lake, it's probably smaller amounts of data. And for that, I think it's still a pretty cool solution. Mm-hmm. Even though like the whole serverless movement from Databricks SQL Warehouse serverless and also from Synapse serverless, they kind of I wouldn't say replace it, but make it easy. It makes it much easier to actually use those tools without having to have a cluster up and running all the time, without all the additional costs, etc.
No, well, while that's completely true, and I do agree with your assertion that basically using these serverless services, would make it less likely. There's still plenty of scenarios where you're just like, look, I've got the data sitting at ADL Gen 2, or for non-Microsoft use S3 or GCS, right? Some cloud object storage, right? And you've got a Power BI desktop just sitting on your laptop, your computer. You just go connect to the data. I like, boom, that's it. It's literally your own personal machine talking to cloud object storage and party hardy. There's a slight, if you're talking about the small amounts of data that we're talking about, like the small to medium size, in essence, the egress costs aren't that high, and it's actually simpler.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, exactly. Oh, by the way, on LinkedIn, Shazeb went ahead and asked a question: ADLs versus Delta.io versus Delta Lake. I'd love you to follow up and provide some context on what the question actually is, because I'm not sure what the context is, but allow me to at least chime in. So this also gives Gerard a little bit of a break, since I'm just peppering him with questions. ADLs is Azure Data Lake Storage. That's the primary storage within Azure. It's also known as ADLs Gen 2 because it's the second generation of it. I will not rat hole into us and explain the whole history behind all this, but that's where we are right now. Delta.io literally is the Delta Lake website. So I'm not sure what else I can add to that, but that's what that is. And Delta Lake obviously being the infrastructure that we're currently talking about today, that provides asset transactions, scalability, schema evolution, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to get into it just because I'm pretty sure most of the people who are listening to this podcast and vidcast know what Delta Lake is. But if you do have some exact questions, Shazeb, please go ahead, chime in on LinkedIn and follow up. I'd love to understand it better. Sorry for maybe missing the context. All right, so now we've talked about how we have this really cool Power BI to Delta Lake tool that Gerard has built. This is awesome. He's got other contributors to it now, so he keeps on improving it. We include it in the roadmap. Cool. All right, but we're not done. Because even though you come from the Power BI perspective, you definitely went ahead and started doing things in the data engineering side. And that has led into what invariably is the other part of the conversation, which is this VSCode Databricks Power Tools. So before we even get to the power, what it is and all this other stuff, because I definitely wanted to spend another 20 minutes or so on just this topic alone. You as a Power BI guy, or for that matter, even as a data engineering guy, why are you using VSCode? Let's start with that statement.
That's actually a good question.
Yeah, see, I told you I would ask you good ones, make you think a little bit.
Actually, I don't know why I got in touch with VS Code in the first place.
Okay. I mean, I'm sure
No, I
you were
really don't know.
doing
But the main
like,
reason was to actually use it. I probably had a look at it for SQL projects back
okay,
then, but as
all
I'm
right.
not really doing SQL projects anymore,
I mean,
no,
maybe
actually, I don't
did you
know.
start using maybe for because you mentioned that you're doing Python, were you like maybe building Python wheels or anything like that that were or that you would chucked into a
No,
cluster? No,
no.
no, okay, no, that's fine.
Most
Okay,
probably was probably for one specific tool that I can't remember, or was one specific extension that was available in VS Code and made life easier for one particular use case, but actually I can't remember anymore.
oh, that's okay.
Um,
All right, well, that's cool. All right, no, but somehow you got into VS Code. All right, fair enough. All right, and then obviously you're working with Databricks. Okay, so then okay, let's start by explaining what is Databricks Power Tools. Let's start with that question then.
Maybe I go one step back. Okay,
Okay.
well, we can start what it is. So it's basically
Yeah. I just want to provide context what it is, and then we'll go
Yeah, so
backwards and explain the process of going there. That's all. That's all I'm saying.
it's basically like, well, Visual Studio Code extension that allows you to interact with Databricks, which includes like managing your clusters, browsing and syncing your workspace. Same for DBFS, triggering jobs, getting job outputs, managing secrets. So basically, most of the stuff that you can do with the API, and we just use VS Code to have like a nice UI around it.
Okay, and then I guess the question is, like, what spawned you to do this? Like, what was the impetus to say, I'm going to spend time to build basically a nice Visual Code extension for what in essence is the Databricks APIs?
Yeah. So it actually started with Databricks APIs. So
Okay, sure.
well, back then when we had this project with Databricks, at some point you also had to do a deployment, right? And I think CLI wasn't there back then, so we basically had to write all the code on our own, like building a wrapper for. Back then we used PowerShell because, well, I'm a Microsoft guy, so I use PowerShell. So we wrote PowerShell scripts to do all the deployment of our notebooks, of our jobs, of the clusters, etc. And this finally led to another tool that I've written, which is the PowerShell module for Databricks.
Oh
Which
yeah,
is,
I completely
again,
forgot about that. Good call. Yeah.
which is basically just, again, like just a wrapper around the Databricks APIs. So you can just do like get clusters and pipe it into stop clusters to just stop all your clusters. So it's pretty cool actually, and pretty nice to use. Supports different authentication methods, whether you use it in Azure DevOps or locally, whatever. It integrates pretty well. And yeah, there I got in touch with all the APIs. And I was always thinking, I mean, I don't want to start up PowerShell session each and every time and then do the authentication and I don't know, do all those calls. And then I thought, what else could I do? And how could I make it easier? And at some point I realized that VS Code can do like a pretty nice, like a tree view where you can navigate to your workspace. And that's where it actually started. And the funny thing about it is that like VS Code extensions are coded in TypeScript and JavaScript, basically. And well, I never had anything to do with those. So it was like a complete green field for me. But still, like with some Googling and stuff, I think I built something that's usable by now. And that's actually pretty good. But I have to admit, like the first weeks were pain. It took me like weeks to just get like a connection to Databricks at all. Which, like, if you're an experienced TypeScript developer, it's probably 5 minutes, I guess. But yeah.
No, it's okay. It just shows that you were trying to learn a new, different system that was not PowerShell based. And it took a little bit of a change, right, in order to be able to shift to that. And so actually Mohammed here has asked the invariably next question that I was going to ask anyways. And by the way, I see a bunch of questions from LinkedIn and Q&A. I will get to them from Sasa, from Harry, from Mohammed, and which we're answering now, and also for Chaitana. I apologize if I'm not saying your name correctly. So we will get to your question shortly. But I wanted to make it as part of the flow that Gerard and I are talking right now. So the question Gerard, Mohammed, excuse me, is asking is like, can you perform all the operations in VSCode, which they basically already do within the Databricks CLI right now? Like, is that the context where you're thinking here?
Yeah, not all of them, because to be honest, like I'm mainly working alone on that extension. So I'm just mainly doing it in my free time. So it's pretty hard to keep up with the space that the REST API is developing and also the CLI is developing. So right now, I would say like the most important APIs have been added to the extension. But it's definitely not all in there. So
cool. I mean, are you right now looking for people to help contribute yet, or is it still just more
always,
labor of love at this point?
If anyone is interested, I'm very happy. It's an open source repository, so everyone can have a look and can contribute if you want. It's Perfect. Running in the context of our company, of Pico. So yeah, just reach out to me, and then we can definitely set up a call and then discuss on how you can contribute. Okay. Also, if you have any specific requirements on new features, I mean, just add them to the repository, and then we'll see if we can implement them. Yeah.
No, makes sense. Oh, which actually I actually forgot to ask you this question right from the beginning. Pico actually has a meaning to it. What the company that you represent? Yeah. What is Pico?
Yeah, it stands for Platform and AI Company, which is like a spin-off of our old company, where some people of us decided to do our own stuff. And yeah, it's the people that I've been working together now for, I don't know, like 15 years or even longer. And yeah, we are a small team, but with great experience. And yeah, now we're building that new company, looking for people. So if you're interested there, just again, like reach out to me. If you are into data engineering or data science with the Microsoft and Databricks background, very happy.
Perfect. No, it's great to always toss in the fact that you're recruiting. So Harry has asked on the LinkedIn Q&A for both the extension and the URL for the company. So in all three platforms, I've already dropped in the VS Code extension GitHub link. Okay, so I've already done that, and I'm about to chime in with the URL of the company as well. So that way, everybody who is interested, by all means, you can go ahead and chime in. So basically, it's just pico.com, by the way, anyways. But don't forget the co is QO, not CO. Okay, so just as a quick call out for everybody. I think I got that right?
Exactly.
Okay, perfect. All right, so I've chimed that in, but then let me go ahead and actually finish posting there. All right, perfect. Now, okay, so I answered Harry's questions on both. I'm glad. So we've talked about how you can contribute to that code. We've also talked about how, if you want to know more about the company, there it is. Perfect. But we still have a bunch of questions. So let's dive into it, okay? Harry, for Zoom, take a look at oh, you're right. I'm sorry. I only put it into the host and panelist link. I did not. Wait, where did
I see it? So it's.
Oh, you see it? Oh, no, but you and I are host panelists. I thought that was an attendee option. I'm trying to look for the attendee option. Oh, interesting. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Elephant, I think that's probably Carly or Candace or Paige. One of them is actually chiming in and put the links in there. So Harry, take a look. In Zoom. If it's not there, you'll see it in our YouTube live right now or the LinkedIn live right now. Okay, so hopefully you get those answers. All right, but let's go back to, because the questions are definitely packing up now. So let me go ahead and start doing them. Let me go backwards, because Sasa asked this question earlier and I missed it, so my accident. But I did want to go back to Power BI for a second.
Yeah. Sure.
Sasa was asking, like, comparing the Power BI to the Delta Lake connector versus the Power BI to the Delta sharing connector. Can you talk a little bit about that? I can help too, but I just want to, from your perspective, what's the context?
That's a good question. You could probably do similar stuff with the Delta sharing connector, I guess. Not sure how this one deals with. So what we also support in the Power BI connector is partition elimination. So if you like put a filter on the partitioning column, it's actually really just reading that one particular
Right now,
column.
right now, if I don't remember the specifics any longer, but there are definitely some parts of it that are not there. Basically, long story short.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that might be something that's different. Well, authentication obviously is different. We support, well, actually we support any storage that's supported by Power BI. So we don't really care where the table resides. Usually, obviously, it's a blob store or data lake storage in too. Yeah, and also not all companies do have a Delta sharing server somewhere or don't have
Right.
Unity
And so that's
catalog
exactly
that
what
comes with it, so
yeah, that's what I was about to add. So for example, if you have a Delta, if you have Power BI to the Delta Lake connector, you don't need any service unless you want to call S3 or ADL Gen 2 or GCS or a cloud object storage in general as a service. Okay. In general, at this point, we sort of, I think most of us consider this as an infrastructure at this point, as opposed to a service. So basically, your data sitting in cloud object storage, your Power BI is sitting on your machine, local machine, and you just connect to it, and you're Bob's your uncle. You're up and running. Okay. In the case of Delta sharing, you actually do need to spin up a Delta sharing service, whether you use the open source Delta sharing service itself or you use
Unity catalog.
like Databricks or whatever, like Unity catalog, right? Thanks. I love the fact that it's more times than often like my partners that remind me this stuff works with Databricks than myself, which is horrible. It is what it is. But the context I'm bringing that up is that right now, because of the speed by which we've been doing things, and for example, that's also why I did like making a shout out to Shingo's Codicera project. Like we are rapidly making changes to Delta sharing and to Delta Core itself that you're going to see us at some point in the very near future coalesce these sets of projects to make things a little bit easier. It doesn't remove the fact that we have a Power BI Delta Lake connector. It doesn't remove anything. It just will simplify things. So the actual coding will be a lot easier for all of us who are trying to maintain this. That's basically the context.
Yep.
So it's cleaning things up. That's what it boils down to. So hope that answers that question. Now let's go right back to LinkedIn in this case. I'm sorry. Chaitana, again, I apologize if I'm saying your name incorrectly. Looks like he has like 5 to 6 gigabytes in a Delta Lake. Okay, and right now he's using Synapse Serverless to connect with it, and serverless to a Power BI data set. Okay, so I'm using Synapse Serverless to connect with Delta Lake and a serverless to the Power BI data set. Is this correct approach? Or do you think you should connect directly from Power BI to Delta Lake? Well, let's talk about Chaitana's specific scenario about 5 gigabytes of data. What do you think? You're right.
So actually, I would say like if you have that serverless already in place, I would probably just leave it as it is because you may also have tied security to that. So if it's working, I wouldn't change it. Also, like if you're reading like 5 gigabytes from time to time, because like serverless is built by the amount that you actually read and process. I think that's not really a huge amount, so I would probably stick with it. But I think I would stick with that setup.
Perfect. No, that makes a lot of sense. All right, and then let's go to Shazeb's question. He's got a good one, but I need to just review it so that way it makes more sense from a podcast perspective. Okay, he's moving about 1 terabyte of data between different storage accounts in Azure Databricks in the same VNet using dbutils. Oh, sorry. I thought this was a Power BI, but okay. Shazeb, I'm going to go ahead and actually take this offline. If you can chime us in your question in the Delta Lake Delta user Slack, which is basically go.delta.io/Slack. I'm pretty sure one of us can answer the question there. It's just that in this particular case, it looks like you're trying to move data from using Azure Databricks in the same VNet, but it's relatively slow. And since Gerard and I are currently talking about Power BI and Databricks Power Tools, that's where we're going to keep most of our questions on. So I would advise you to go ahead and chime in there, okay? And but I'll drop it in a link afterwards. But let's definitely keep it on tack because getting Gerard to be able to actually answer questions live is really difficult. It's late. Remember, he's on a different time zone with us. So yeah. Let's stick it to that. Okay. Let me switch back to the Q&A from Zoom because we got some questions inside here. What languages did you use to access the API through VSCode? You already answered, but Harry, I might have missed it. So why don't you go ahead and provide that context? Like, what languages did you use for the API?
Yeah, so the whole extension is written in TypeScript, and well, there are different ways how you could access the API, which is basically just an HTTP REST call. And I decided to use fetch APIs there, which come native with TypeScript. Gotcha.
And you mentioned like you had your initial hiccups, right, with using TypeScript, but how do you feel about using TypeScript now? I'm just curious.
I feel confident. The hardest part is actually, like, I'm regularly coding in PySpark. I'm coding in TypeScript from time to time. Sometimes it's PowerShell. And even like sometimes for the most basic commands, I just mix them up and it's just not working. And yeah.
Cool. So. No, makes sense. And so Harry also had a sort of a follow-up question related. Do you use, like, because of everything you're doing, even though it's not directly related, but I can understand where Harry's coming from in this particular case. Do you use automation tools like Apache Airflow, or are you like primarily when your automation, are you still using like Databricks jobs through your extensions, or using ADF? I'm just curious from your perspective, what are you typically doing?
Most of the time it's actually Data Factory, Azure Data Factory.
I guess, but yeah.
Barely use Databricks jobs. No experience with Airflow, to be honest. But that's, again, like probably just natural because I'm coming from a Microsoft background, and we do all of our projects in Azure, and well, Azure Data Factory is, well, the native choice there. We could probably also use Databricks jobs, but I think the reason why I still prefer Data Factory is because it's much easier to actually also connect to, for example, on-prem sources or all the different, I don't know, like supports like 150 different data sources out of the box. And even if it's just for the initial raw load, it's much easier to do it in Data Factory because of all the predefined connectors. Doing this in Databricks or from a Databricks job is probably much more difficult. So usually, like, the first step is loading data from the source system into the data lake using Data Factory, and from there on start processing it with Databricks. Yeah, that's the most common architecture that we actually have.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. I do want to chime in defense of Databricks that we've definitely made it easier now. We have more connectors now, but this is not an attempt for you to knock ADF. Quite the opposite. I'm friends with a bunch of the connector teams, folks, and they've done an amazing job. So yeah, so great stuff. Okay, let's see what else I guess this is the final question. Is Unity Catalog supported in the Power BI connector? I don't believe it is, right? At least not right now. I don't believe.
How would it?
Yeah, basically the idea is that you would go from Power BI to UC and then UC to grab the information. So in other words, you'd actually have to query the metadata through UC as opposed to querying the data directly through Delta Lake. I don't think that's even on our roadmap.
No, so from a Power BI connector point of view, what we need is basically a storage location.
Right.
That's like the storage location to a Delta Lake table. That's what we need. And there is no, that's what you need. There is
So just to Garrett, to help answer this question, don't forget there is a Power BI to Databricks connector as well, which is different from the Power BI to Delta Lake connector, which is what Gerard and I are talking about right now. So to overemphasize the point, the Power BI to Delta Lake connector, which is what we're talking about, which is open source, which is sitting in the GitHub, the Delta.io GitHub repository, the connectors location, right? That is allowing Power BI to connect directly to Delta Lake. It does not use Databricks. It doesn't use Synapse. It doesn't use any service. It is literally, you have a point, a storage point in cloud, and Power BI to Delta Lake connector connects to it, and you're party hardy. There is a concept of a Power BI to Databricks connector that would be
Which
the
also
one that
supports
actually,
Unity catalog.
yeah, that would support UC. So that's part of the reason why I'm saying, I don't think it makes sense for us to try to build an open source Power BI to Delta Lake through UC connector, at least not yet. I mean, UC has a bunch of open APIs, and maybe theoretically, okay, here's what I would do. If there's a lot of interest in this, please chime into the Delta IO connectors GitHub repo, create an issue, and start voting for it. But at least if there is interest, because at least from where I'm sitting from, I don't think there is right now. I mean, yeah. So and then finally, let's see. There was a question. Oh darn it! I thought I saw a question. Okay, looks like we answered. Oh, I think there was a question from somebody about ADF versus Databricks jobs, but I think you answered it. So I think they might have removed the question afterwards. So in that case, I think that covers all of our questions for today. I really thank you, everybody who's attending here. I really appreciate your time for attending today's session. I appreciate you answering all these questions. And most importantly, Gerard, I thank you very much for taking the time to spend on this particular podcast and vidcast series to talk about Power BI and the Databricks Visual Studio Code Databricks Power Tools. Any other last thoughts? I did want you to do a shout out to your company. So any other last thoughts that you want to chime in?
Yeah, maybe like as you all probably know, like also Databricks recently released a Visual Studio Code extension for basically running code also from Visual Studio Code, also with Spark Connect, which was just kind of released with Spark 3.4, I think, right? So that's something similar that we do, but it's still also different because it's mainly Python. So it's actually only Python at the moment. Whereas I think I did not mention it before, but if you're using Databricks Power Tools, you can also execute notebooks from there. They're very similar experience than you would actually have from the Databricks UI, supporting widgets and DB utils and everything. And also Scala and SQL and R notebooks, actually. So if that's something that you want, so like having a notebook experience in your local IDE, you might also want to have a look on Databricks Power Tools.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I really appreciate everybody's time. Let me end it by simply saying, if you have any more questions that you'd like to chime in on that you can think of, especially related to today's topic about Delta Lake Power BI to Delta Lake connector, about Databricks Visual Studio Code Databricks Power Tools, join Gerard and myself on go.delta.io/Slack. We are there pretty regularly answering questions. There are multiple channels. Chime away. So that's it for today. Again, thank you very much for all your time. I appreciate it.
Sure.